So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar for Invasive Species Week. I'm Kay Haw of the UK Squirrel Accord, and I'm joined today by Heinz Traut of Red Squirrels Northern England and Bridget Johnson of Knowsley Safari's Reclaiming Reds project. We'll start in a moment with presentations, and then we'll follow up with the question and answer session. Thanks to those that have already sent in questions during the registration process. But if you have anything else you wish to ask the panelists, please put it in the chat function and we'll try and pick them. I'll try and collate it as we go along and pick it up in the question and answer session at the end. But if anybody else wants to add their views or answer the questions as we go along, just feel free to use the chat function that's there for everybody. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. And I will start by sharing my screen. Let's hope the technology all works. Is it working? Heinz, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Great. If you feel free to mute and turn your videos off if you want, guys. So, woodland invasives, mainly focusing on grey squirrels. This week is Invasive Species Week from the 24th to the 30th of May. I'm not sure if any of you are taking part, but it is worth getting involved. You can find out more at the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat's website, or if you go on and find them on their Twitter page. It is a really important subject, and this is a really useful awareness raising week because there are a lot of invasive species that are causing problems around the UK. So what are invasive non-native species? They're basically species that have been introduced and that have negative impacts. They either are able to utilise the resources in their new habitat and spread rapidly or outcompete native species. They may have no natural control, no natural predators, or no pests and diseases that keep their populations in check. It has to be stressed that not all non-native species are invasive, and people like the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat and ourselves and many people in the conservation and forestry worlds only deal with around the 10% of non-native species that do become invasive because they cause serious environmental, economic or societal damage and are therefore classed as invasive. They are seen as one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss around the world, along with habitat destruction and climate change. And they're thought to cost the UK economy around £1.8 billion a year, so a serious economic issue. So in examples of some invasive species that woodland owners and managers regularly tackle in this country are things like rhododendron, introduced because of its beautiful flowers into gardens, but escapes into different natural habitats. In woodland environments, it can take over the ground flora and the shrub layer. It has nothing really lives on rhododendron or eats rhododendron, and it releases chemicals into the ground that mean that other plants and species aren't able to grow in and around it. So it can be a real problem, and it can be a real problem to get rid of as well. It's hard to remove. Himalayan balsam spreads through along rivers, also spread through flooding events, and the seeds, which pods pop and fling the seeds far and wide. It's particularly favoured by bees, sometimes over native species, but unfortunately it has very shallow roots and dies off in the winter. So if it covers large areas, it can leave that soil bare, and so you can get soil erosion and destabilising of riverbanks. Japanese knotweed, another species that can take over large areas. It can also be really damaging to buildings and is so strong it can break through concrete and damage the foundations of buildings, and is another one that's found in woodland habitats and is tackled and must be tackled very carefully because even tiny fragments of it can grow into new plants. Giant hogweed, a huge giant hogweed, is more of an issue because of the burns that it can cause if any of the sap gets on your skin. If it gets on your skin and it's exposed to UV light, like sunlight, it can cause serious burns. Children have been burnt badly by playing with what seems to be a very fun plant to maybe, you know, break off and use as a sword. And again, therefore, you must take a lot of care when trying to tackle and manage it. Citrus longhorn beetle, not established in the UK, but is one of those species that you must be watching for. This and Asian longhorn beetle cause these huge holes in trees, and it can be very damaging. There have been a couple of cases of it found in the UK, but they've been alerted early and found early and then tackled. And so it isn't currently in the UK, but people really should be on alert for this. And the Asian longhorn beetle looks very much like it. Muntjac deer, there are only 2 native species of deer, but 6 species of deer in the UK, and deer well known to have damaging impacts on woodlands by eating a lot of the ground flora and the shrub layer, eating newly planted trees and natural regeneration, so reducing the health of the woodland and the overall biodiversity that it can support. And then the grey squirrel, which we'll be focusing on today. So, grey squirrels are introduced from North America between 1876 and 1929 to different areas of England and Ireland. However, it was soon realised that they were having negative impacts on red squirrel populations, but also on trees. And in 1937, a law was passed to prohibit their importation and keeping in Great Britain because of the damage they were causing. They cause local extinctions of red squirrels, which Heinz and Bridget will go talk about more later, and they seriously damage broadleaf tree health. They're classed as an invasive non-native species in the UK, but as an invasive alien species in Europe. They were introduced into Italy, where they're having similar damaging impacts on the red squirrel populations and trees. And this is a particular worry because in the UK, at least, they are in some ways contained to this island, but in Italy they may have the opportunity as they spread to spread into so many different areas of Europe, and therefore really seriously impact the wider red squirrel population range. These are some maps of grey squirrel distribution, just showing you how the grey squirrels have spread over the years and taken over most of England and Wales and large areas of Northern Ireland and into Scotland. As Heinz and Bridget will talk about later, there's some serious work going on to protect the red squirrels from this grey squirrel expansion. But as you get the grey squirrels moving into larger areas, their populations increase, and this increases their impacts on broadleaf tree health. In terms of legislation, grey squirrels are covered by the Schedule 9 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, so it's illegal to release them or allow them to escape into the wild. They're covered by the EU regulation on invasive alien species, which really focuses on having a 3-tiered system, so that prevention is the most cost-effective way to manage invasive species, so stopping new species getting into areas. And there was a horizon scanning paper by Helen Roy that looked at species that could potentially become invasive and be introduced into the UK that's worth reading. Early detection and rapid eradication is the next most effective way of dealing with invasive species. So species like the Asian hornet are an alert species. If you go to the Non-Native Species Secretariat website, there's a whole section on species alerts, and there are particular species that they're looking out for that, if they're introduced into the country or if they're found in the country, they're reported early and they're quickly dealt with. So things like Asian hornet, Siberian chipmunk, American bullfrog, raccoon dog, and a number of others. And it's worth going on there, just noting what they are and how to identify them. And if you see them in the wild, to report them as soon as possible. And then into the Invasive Alien Species Enforcement and Permitting Order 2019, which was bringing the EU legislation into UK law. And there's a list of species that that order relates to, and grey squirrels sit under that. So in terms of bark stripping damage, we're currently in bark stripping season. So April to August is when the squirrels do their bark stripping damage, because that is the time of year when the sap is rising up and down and phloem is rising up the trees. You get lots of important broadleaf species, which support a lot of our other native species. Stressed trees are less resilient. The open wounds can be affected by pathogens. And the National Forestry inventory data states that there are 166,000 hectares of woodland stands that have been damaged by grey squirrels. However, the data the NFI records is only from 1.8 meters upwards in a tree, and actually grey squirrels can bark strip trees from the very base of the tree all the way up through the canopy. So that may be a conservative estimate. 2014, 2021, the Royal Forestry Society conducted surveys of landowners and managers, and these highlighted grey squirrels as the greatest threat to broadleaf timber production, above the threats posed by tree diseases and deer. And I think a lot of people are often surprised about this. You know, pests and diseases and deer issues are often more well known, but this is one of the things we're hoping to increase awareness around is the impact that grey squirrels do have on trees and on timber production. We currently have a call for evidence. We're encouraging people to send any photos or videos they have of grey squirrel bark stripping, either in action, as we see here in the National Forest. This was caught on camera by a wildlife camera we left there. You can see it's attacked the bottom of the tree here, and then it's bark stripping. And if it likes that tree, it will continue doing that year after year until that tree is severely damaged. But if you have any photos or videos of either of it in action or of the damage afterwards, please do send them into info@squirrelaccord.uk. We're trying to gather a body of visual evidence that we can map out and see where the damage is taking place. Tree species at risk. This is a table put together by Graham Taylor of Prior and Ricketts Silviculture, and also chair of the European Squirrel Initiative, for looking at different species susceptibility to grey squirrel damage. Species that are highly susceptible and are focused on by grey squirrels are things like oaks, certain poplar species, beech, hornbeam, sweet chestnut. Less susceptible are things like ash, although that has its own susceptibility to Callara, sadly, at the moment, Scots pine, red oak. And then those that are lowest are things like wild cherry, lime, horse chestnut. Comment from an RFS member in the 2014 survey said they replanted the major part of their woodlands in 1987 with 80% English oak, but the bark stripping by grey squirrels over those 26 years seriously damaged an estimated 40 to 50% of the crop, and in many cases that was fatal. And if you think there's another, you know, the squirrels can continue bark stripping for another maybe 24 years of that woodland's life, and the damage can actually be up to 90% of a woodland, planted woodland, can be damaged by grey squirrel bark stripping, depending on the species. So the Royal Forestry Society, they did along with other UK Squirrel Accord signatories, they put together a report on the cost of grey squirrel damage to woodland in England and Wales. And it was estimated using a model and the available data that it costs at least £37 million a year. And this is either in terms of lost timber value or reduced carbon capture, damage mitigation, or trees that have to be replaced because they're so damaged or dead. And this wasn't able to take into account the biodiversity, to cost the biodiversity impacts. So the impacts of timber, as you can see from the picture of this beech, it's been stained by the fungal infections that have got into the tree through the wounds that have been created by the grey squirrel. It can weaken, stress and kill the trees. It reduces the timber value and yield so that you're never getting the returns on that woodland that you're actually putting into the woodland, either with the planting or the growing of it. It deforms the stems, and you can get the loss of leaders. Biodiversity impact, so something that Heinz and Bridget will focus on, is the local extinctions of red squirrels, which are now endangered in Great Britain. Individual trees can be damaged and killed, and it can alter the woodland composition. So if you've got an oak woodland and a lot of oak in your woodland, but they get to the stage where they've been so damaged by grey squirrels, then you get the loss of that oak throughout the woodland. oak is our most biodiverse species in the UK, supporting over 2,000 other species. And so you don't just get the loss of the trees themselves, you get the loss of the biodiversity that would have lived on those trees as the trees grow and mature and age. And you also get a reluctance from some landowners and managers, understandably, to plant broadleaf trees. And that's why it's really important to have grey squirrel management in place. Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust estimate that they can reduce fledgling rates of native birds by 15%. It'd be interesting to have more data on that. Regarding carbon impacts, you get the loss of the trees themselves, but they're also not able to grow to their full potential. So rather than the large, healthy, mature canopy trees, you get reduced carbon sequestration through less healthy and damaged trees. You can also get the release of carbon through the trees as they rot after they've been damaged and killed. Health and safety can be an issue. The weakened stems can break. You can get, as you can see, from the picture, this tree was ring barked and that canopy has just fallen out of that tree. That can be a health and safety issue by falling on people, but it can also make felling more risky in the long term. If you're interested in monitoring the impact of grey squirrels, then the National Forest have created this grey squirrel impact and assessment methodology and recording sheet, which is on the Squirrel Accord website in our resources library. Our Knowledge Exchange and Woodland Management Subcommittee with the National Forest are currently looking at this methodology and just updating it and refreshing it and making it a bit more robust. But then we're hoping that we can maybe roll this out across wide areas so that there is a standard methodology for assessing the severity and scale and location of damage of it. But it's really useful to conduct it as a baseline for your woodland, and then to do it regularly to see how that damage changes over time, either as the woodland grows or as your management of grey squirrels increases. Heinz will talk more about management, but this is a really useful forestry standard technical note which came out looking at managing grey squirrels. That looks at control strategies, collaborative action. It compares different control methods and it advises on how to carry out management methods. And landscape scale collaboration is the most effective way of managing grey squirrels. Heinz, I know, is going to talk more about pine martens, but there is interest in the natural predators as pine martens recover. And we have some research on fertility control for grey squirrels. So we're looking at creating an oral contraceptive and species-specific delivery mechanism that will offer a complementary or alternative non-lethal option for grey squirrels. We're currently in the exciting third year of our 5-year research project, and things are going really well this year. This year will finish in September 2021. And at the end of that, we will take one of the 3 oral contraceptives that we're researching through to years 4 and 5. And we recently did an update with the Animal and Plant Health Agency that are conducting the research, and that update's available on our YouTube channel. And I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that supported and donated to our research so far. We couldn't do this without you. And finally, last year we created a video, an awareness raising video to, I'll just see if I'm, yes. That's fine. I was just checking the sound. It's awareness raising video looking at damage to trees and the issues and solutions that might be available. And this is on our YouTube channel as well. And we're just encouraging people to share this with their networks and to try and raise awareness. So I'll play this for you now.
Healthy trees are vital for a sustainable future, providing clean air and water, sequestering carbon, supplying timber, supporting wildlife and enhancing human health and well-being. Yet they're under increasing pressure from rapid climate change, from pests and diseases, and from invasive species that are spread around the world, deliberately or accidentally, through global trade and travel, and can cause major environmental, economic and societal issues. Originally from North America, grey squirrels were introduced to areas of England and Ireland between 1876 and 1929 for ornamental interest, but their spread across large areas of the British Isles has caused local extinctions of red squirrels and profoundly damaged tree health through their bark stripping activities.
Once the squirrel takes the bark off the tree, what happens is that it interrupts the sap flow. The sap flow is the kind of the blood, the juices that help the tree grow. And so all the energy and photosynthetic capacity that goes into the green leaf matter gets transported down through the phloem, and that's the stuff that gets damaged. It's what the squirrels are actually after. And it interrupts growth, normal growth, and interrupts total volume growth, but also the form. And it's the form thing that the foresters get very upset about. But the total growth is the thing that matters in terms of carbon sequestration and hence climate change.
Grey squirrels are one of the major threats to our woodlands, especially the creation of young mixed native woodlands, as they are basically destroying them.
Grey squirrels often target the healthiest and most vigorous trees, causing major damage and fatalities to ecologically and economically important broadleaf species.
You can see down here, there was a little trial site of damage that happened actually last summer. And the squirrel obviously liked this tree, so this summer's returned, and you can see up here, taking the bark from all the way up, and it's now killed the top of the tree. That matters to the economics of broadleaf woodland management, because once that tree is damaged, you fail to recover the value that you put into it in the first place. And whilst that might sound insignificant, actually there are also other impacts. That tree will never achieve the great height that of the trees, mature trees that you see today. It'll just be a poorly misshapen tree. It will actually fail to deliver all the things that we're trying to deliver with climate change, and on the carbon front, it'll be suboptimal, considerably suboptimal on the carbon front. And what happens over time is it isn't just this tree. This was the first year. Slowly but surely it'll be that tree there and that tree there and that tree there, and you get an attrition. And over a period of 7 to 8 years, you might find that 30, 40, 50, 60, even 80%, even 90% of the trees are damaged.
While bark stripping causes major problems for hardwood timber growers, it also has a negative impact on the biodiversity that large trees can support as they grow and mature.
So in terms of the biodiversity side of the woodland, what we want is that some of our trees will replace eventually the big veteran trees which have their own ecosystems, with niches for plants and lichens, with niches for mammals and birds to nest and shelter, and the canopy shelter that they give to insects. So the problem with damage by grey squirrels, they don't just damage the timber potential of your woodland. They're going to stop your young trees becoming the next biodiverse generation of veteran trees. So there's a misconception, I think, that it's a great thing to have damaged trees. One of the things a lot of our woodlands are short of is deadwood. And there's a sort of misconception that a damaged tree provides more deadwood. But actually, the deadwood should be coming from old trees losing limbs or old trees having rot. But the squirrels are doing damage to young trees, and a damaged 20-year-old tree is not providing, that's not part of a healthy ecosystem to have that deadwood coming from a young tree. That tree should be vigorous and healthy and there to replace the high canopy in the future.
As science and technology evolves, new solutions to old problems are constantly being explored. In 2017, for example, the UK Squirrel Accord partnership began research on an oral contraceptive for grey squirrels. Over the coming years, it's hoped this will offer an effective, less labour-intensive and non-lethal option for management.
The reason for this research comes mainly from public demand for alternatives to lethal methods to manage wildlife. The project supported by the UK Squirrel Accord is something we are particularly keen on because it's a multi-year project that gives us the possibility of both developing and testing new contraceptives, oral contraceptives for wildlife.
We've been involved and hope to be involved in some of the trial work on the new contraceptive that is being developed as a means of controlling grey squirrels. I think this is the great hope for us all, in that this could be an effective way of significantly reducing the grey squirrel population.
There's now a growing appreciation of the need to find new, innovative solutions and to raise greater awareness of the issues our trees face. To this end, the Yorkshire Arboretum is building a new tree health centre to provide a hub for education and knowledge sharing.
One of the things we want to do at the Tree Health Centre that we're building here at the Yorkshire Arboretum is to promote the concept of healthy trees in a healthy landscape for a healthy general environment for everyone. And that includes thinking about what trees to plant for the future. Do we plant things like sycamore, which are squirrel prone? Do we think of other things? Do we think of a mixture and so forth to counteract all this problem with tree pest diseases and squirrels? I think we need a healthy mixture in the woodland. We need sensible squirrel management and vigilance against all sorts of these problems that are affecting our trees.
As we lose increasing numbers of broadleaf trees to grey squirrel bark stripping alongside pests and diseases, it's crucial that we focus even more on protecting the health of these important species, working together to ensure a truly sustainable future.
Thank you to everybody that was involved in creating that video. And thank you very much for listening. If you want any more information, you can find it on our website, www.squirrelaccord.uk. We've got other videos on our YouTube channel, Twitter posts, or drop us an email, especially if you have any grey squirrel bark stripping evidence at the moment. Thank you very much. And I will now pass over to Heinz.
Right, thank you, Kay. Just give me a few seconds to share my presentation.
And I'll have a look at the questions and try and collate some more questions as we go.
Right, hopefully that's come up on your screen okay.
Yes, it has.
Very good. Right, so Red Squirrels Northern England, we're a project that is hosted by Cumbria and Northumberland Wildlife Trust. We obviously collaborate with other wildlife trusts as well. The project is managed, or the project management group consists of Forestry Commission, Natural England, Red Squirrel Survival Trust, and the UK Squirrel Accord sits in an advisory role as well. So that's just to give a bit of context. So invasive species. So the Minister of Rural Affairs and Biosecurity, Lord Gardner, said invasive non-native species not only challenge the survival of some of our rarest species, but damage our natural ecosystem as well as costing the economy more than 1.7 billion per year. The law requires management measures to be put in place. And here, as Kay alluded to, there's a whole list of non-native species that are problematic in the UK, about 30 animals. The list at the top are widely spread, and the list just below this line is less common, but nevertheless, they're all problematic and need some sort of management strategy. So the grey squirrel is obviously one of those that presents a problem to us. And they generally found in all sorts of habitat, broadleaf, mixed, conifer forests, parks and gardens. And they included on the International Union for Conservation of Nature's list of 100 worst invasive non-native species. So they're a serious problem. And again, as Kay mentioned, the impact on our woodlands can be significant. There can be a reduction in the natural regeneration of various tree species, oak, beech, sycamore, elm, yew, and ash, due to the consumption of acorns and seed by the grey squirrel. So it's not only the damage that they inflict on the timber by bark stripping, but it's also the consumption of the seeds from the trees, that therefore, if there are less seeds falling on the ground for potential natural regeneration, there are going to be less trees to germinate from those seeds. There's also the potential impact on the composition of our forests through management strategies to try and combat grey squirrels. In the past, we've advised, not just ourselves, but we've advised landowners to plant tree species that are favourable for red squirrels and not so favourable for grey squirrels. So the list on the left-hand side: red squirrel friendly trees, neutral species in the middle, and negative species that facilitate the incursion and nourishment of grey squirrels. So if, we're not saying this is a bad thing, but we've got to think about the long-term implication of this. If we are altering the composition of our forests, what is the long-term forest going to look like? Is it going to be robust or not? So it needs some very careful thinking. How do we approach these challenges? Of it, as Kay said, tree damage for the timber industry per annum is £37 million, plus another 23 million and other economical impacts. There's the issue of carbon sequestration, and then the forest's ability to adapt and be resilient because of the damage inflicted by bark stripping through the grey squirrel is another problem to deal with. And then there are ecosystem impacts. For example, there are many species, native species, that are dependent on cavities within trees to breed, using it as nests. But if the seed composition or the amount of seed consumed by grey squirrels impacts the composition of the forest and the diversity, if they bark strip, and that prevents the forest or individual trees from aging, becoming mature and growing to its full age, and therefore not creating these cavities, then we're not going to have the necessary habitat, i.e. nests, for some of the species we hope to see thrive in our woodlands. So therefore it can have an indirect negative impact on other native species, not only red squirrels. Another impact is on dormice. In this case, it's an interspecific competition because of the competition for food. It's been estimated that around 63% of hazelnuts are eaten by grey squirrels, and therefore less food available to dormice. And then the British Trust for Ornithology and other organisations did some research into trying to determine what are the impacts of grey squirrels on breeding birds. Now, I know Kay mentioned a figure of 15% of breeding birds are impacted, although it's not really known exactly what that impact is. It's a very difficult thing to establish. As you can imagine, if you wanted to do some research in the forest, to go and investigate every single bird's nest, which may be quite high up in the tree, is not an easy research project to do. So the impact is not fully understood. Nevertheless, there are some instances where, for example, in the case of the hawfinch, it is understood that there is an impact through grey squirrel predation on their nests. And then British Trust for Ornithology also, in their research paper, explained that there'll be a habitat deterioration or habitat reduction, again, through the damage. They also said the forest composition is likely to change. And also potentially the availability of insect food for birds can be impacted, specifically the sycamore that is quite susceptible to grey squirrel damage. Sycamores themselves do facilitate and provide food for lots of insects and therefore provide food for birds. So that can have a knock-on effect as well. So red squirrels is obviously the important one for our project, being impacted by grey squirrels. According to the recent Mammal Society's publication, red squirrels are designated as endangered in Britain, mainly due to the threat of grey squirrels. And they said the loss, there has been an estimated loss of more than 60% of its range in England and Wales, less in Scotland, in the last 13 years. So why is the grey squirrel an issue for the reds? Well, first of all, they outcompete them for food and habitat as well, and would replace reds in a matter of 15 years. The more significant factor is that the grey squirrel is a carrier of the smallpox virus, which is lethal to our red squirrels. Kay did show this map earlier, so I won't dwell on that, but again, it shows the decline in range of red squirrels due to the advancement of grey squirrels. And the smallpox disease, which the grey squirrel is a carrier of, and transmitted to the red squirrel through various means. Again, the mechanism for that is not fully understood, but is believed to be through saliva, parasites, urine, and so on, through sharing, and also through sharing feeding sites and feeder boxes. But the disease itself is very, very lethal. It's a matter of 15 days before a red squirrel will succumb to the disease once it is contracted. They develop lesions around any exposed area of skin. This then makes them very disorientated, weak, and lethargic, and eventually they become malnourished and sadly pass away. So grey squirrel population management, why do we need to manage grey squirrel populations? Well, I think the preceding slides help to explain the significant impact greys have. So there's economic benefits as well from managing invasive species. So reducing the losses from forestry and agriculture, improve ecosystem health, and safeguard our biodiversity. Now, does grey squirrel management work? Does it work to control grey squirrels? Well, yes, it does. I find that it's a very good example from Angus. Greys were managed and reduced. The prevalence of the smallpox virus within the original population before control was 75% positive. And after those 8 years, the prevalence of the disease from the sample grey squirrels removed was only 4%. So definitely it thins out the population of greys, and it reduces that probability of the virus jumping from greys to reds. This is an example from South Scotland, where a particular estate, again, it's not just this estate, but the whole valley and catchment was surveyed, but this one estate and one graph shows the overall picture of what the results were from the whole catchment. So you continue to manage grey squirrels, and you can see in year 1 through to year 4, you are removing a good number of greys, and after year 3, you start to see red squirrels coming back. And this is a typical scenario when you are managing grey squirrels in a red squirrel area. So the grey squirrel control network, it's really important to have a network that's collaborating, that's connected, so that a necessary impact can be achieved instead of an isolated effort in just one place. It needs to be a collaborative effort. This is just some results from the north of England from last year. The map on the left-hand side demonstrates wherever there is a little square on the map, shows where somebody has done something to conserve red squirrels, whether that be monitoring, trapping, shooting, etc. I'll mention it again later, but this effort is thanks by and large more than 80% to local red squirrel volunteer groups. And was it not for that effort, we would not be in the situation where we can show the map on the right-hand side and show red squirrel distribution is still very good in the north of England, where this effort is being invested. The graphs on the bottom just demonstrate the split between the project, the north and the east, and also the project RSNE's efforts. One little statistic I'll point out on the bottom left pie chart is that the effort or the area covered in Cumbria is much larger. It's about 2/3 of the overall, and effort in Northumberland is 1/3. That is just due to the historical demographics of local groups and many more well-established groups being in Cumbria. Northumberland is also less sparsely populated. So we've still got a bit of work to do there to engage more volunteers. This is just zoomed into those maps. Map on the left illustrates the effort in the north through controlling, monitoring grey squirrels. The same on the right that just shows some figures and numbers. This is Cumbria. So you can see from this that the effort being invested is tremendous. It's widespread and really significant. And thanks to this effort, we have this picture of a relatively good population and distribution of red squirrels. Let's not say, well done, stop there. There's still a long way to go. Greys are still continually trying to incur into red squirrel range and continue to pose a threat. There are occasional squirrel pox outbreaks here and there that need to be dealt with. The red squirrel groups, the volunteer groups in the north of England is shown on this map. And again, it's more than 80% of the effort is thanks to local groups. Also, landowners do contribute their part. Our project helps landowners where we can to access the government grant scheme, Countryside Stewardship for Woodland Improvement, which pays £100 per hectare, and we manage about 19 estates across the north of England, or assist in the management. The monitoring program is really important as well to take stock to see, is all this effort making a difference? And yes, it is. The last time we did the squirrel monitoring program was 2019. We're doing it again this year. Obviously, last year was a break due to the national crisis. In summary, around 170 people are involved in this survey. 86% of the people are from volunteer groups. About 290 sites were surveyed that particular year, over 3 months in the spring. And the occupancy of squirrels detected in that particular year, of those 290 sites, 45.9% of them were positive for greys and 43.4% for reds. And the next slide gives that over an 8-year period. And if you note the red line between 2015 and 19, it's more or less stable level. Now, given the historical decline and the maps that Kay and I shared of from RSST that showed the 1945 picture, 2010 and 2010, that drastic decline in range of red squirrels and advancement of greys. This graph tells a different story. It shows that we've halted that decline. We are helping red squirrels hang in there by managing grey squirrels. Just quickly looking at other or alternative developments, now pine martens are said to be a natural predator of grey squirrels, biological control, if you like. Some research that came out of Ireland a few years ago by Dr. Emma Sheehy demonstrated that over extensive area, grey squirrels population crashed over a 9,000 square kilometre area. Simultaneously, red squirrel numbers bounced back and increased. The dynamics and the reasons for this effect is still being studied to be understood, but it's believed that pine martens and red squirrels co-evolved happily together for millennia. Grey squirrels did not, and therefore not familiar with the predator. It's possible that pine martens inflict a stress factor on grey squirrels that may impact their breeding ability or willingness. It might cause them to leave the area. The proportion of grey squirrels in the pine marten's diet was also found to be significantly higher than red squirrels. Grey squirrels was around 14–15%, and red squirrels was around, I think it was about 4%. Why is that the case? Again, it's speculated that grey squirrels, being a forest floor dweller more so than red squirrels, and a bigger animal, are easier to catch, perhaps a little bit slower, make a better meal. It's worth expending that energy in going after it. Red squirrels are quite fast and smaller animal and are able to get to the end of the branch, and perhaps the pine marten cannot get to it that easily. So the grey squirrel presents a bigger nourishment reward. The study was replicated in Scotland as well, and 3 locations, north, middle and south. And again, it was found the same effect, correlation was found. Wherever you have a pine marten population density that's sufficiently high, the higher it goes, the more grey squirrel numbers drop. But simultaneously, the more red squirrel numbers increase. So the science is clear on that there is a positive correlation with red squirrels when pine martens are around. In north of England, there have been a number of confirmed sightings. This is just a quick illustration. So they are naturally spreading into the north of England already. This is one of the pine martens we detected on one of our cameras a couple of years ago. Looking at very briefly at another alternative, and one of the videos that Kay shared had Giovanna from the Animal and Plant Health Agency in it, and she explained about the fertility control that's in development for grey squirrels, for that to be deployed. We are working with the Animal and Plant Health Agency. We will be in the future to develop a methodology for deployment. Of course, the product, whichever the project is, needs to be safe, and it must be no side effects. It must be effective over the long term. There must be no non-target species. There must be no effects down the food chain for predators and so on. It must be inexpensive and practical to deploy. Of course, it's very important that a feeder is developed that is species specific. We don't want red squirrels accessing the bait in the red squirrel range, and so therefore the APHA are working to develop a species specific feeder. Thank you. I went through that very quickly. Hopefully we'll take some questions at the end. Thanks, Kay.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Heinz. That was really interesting. And now we'll move on to Bridget to have a look at the Reclaiming Reds project.
Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen. And that worked?
Yes, that's working.
Great. Okay. So thank you very much for having us today. Thanks, Kay, for the invite. So I'm Bridget. I'm the Research and Conservation Manager at Knowsley Safari, and one of the projects that I manage is the Reclaiming Reds project. And what I think is really nice about this is that Kay has given a really good background into the issues that woodlands face because of invasive species, specifically grey squirrels, and Heinz and I are giving some more specific project examples. So our project is much newer than some of the work that Heinz has been talking about. So hopefully for some of you it's an introduction to the project, and I know a few of you watching are a little bit more familiar with the project already. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about the Knowsley estate, who we are, what we do, history of squirrels at Knowsley, what sort of led us to developing the Reclaiming Reds project, and the progress that we've made to date. So for those of you who don't know, Knowsley estate is a privately owned estate in the northwest. It's 2,500 acres approximately. It's mixed use, and that's an extreme mix of uses. So the bottom sort of southeast corner is a safari park, so that's Knowsley Safari, so that's public access. And then throughout the rest of the estate, we've got a huge combination of activities, farming, agriculture, game shooting, etc. So there's a lot of diverse uses for the estate. And we're very lucky, it's a very green area in a very urban environment. So we're about 11 miles from Liverpool city centre. And with that comes a great diversity of native species, for which we do a lot of work, monitoring, surveying, putting in mitigation where it's necessary and things. So we're really lucky, you know, we've got 9 bat species on site, we've got great woodland bird diversity, amphibians, moths. I've just put a few examples up on the slide, but it's fantastic to have such a biodiverse estate in such an urban area. We are extensively covered in woodland. So the stands vary from less than 5 acres to more than 40 acres throughout the site. We've got pine woodland, broadleaf woodland and mixed woodland, and a range of new plantation woodland to ancient oak woodland as well. So it's a really, really diverse site. And we're lucky enough that in recent years, we did still have red squirrels on site. So we used to do just biannual monitoring, so transects twice a year in the spring and autumn. And this was done with the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And in 2014 and 2015, you can see the points on the map where we had our last red squirrel sightings on transects. And then in 2016 and 2017, you can see the blue markings on the map in the north of the estate where we had our last other observations of reds, so not on the official transects, but by staff that know what they're looking for. You know, they're not going to get mixed up with a stoat or anything like that. Their identification skills are sound. So the transects paint a pretty sad picture. So we can see as time's gone on, the reds have dropped down and the greys have increased in their sightings. It's not nice to see. Is though exactly what's been seen across a lot of the country. And we're also, alongside this increase in greys, are seeing an increase in damage to our trees as well. So this is just one picture, but you can see the tree in the foreground is damaged, but if you look further back as well, you can see some quite extensive damage to the trees in the background. So what was causing the reduction in reds and the increase in tree damage? So as the graph showed, we had more greys, and generally our grey squirrel control wasn't really adequate for the problem that we were facing. So it was intermittent, it was generally quite opportunistic rather than being strategic. We also had limited connectivity with other projects in the local area. So although we were communicating really well with the stronghold up on the northwest coast, we weren't necessarily working our control to be kind of in connection with their work. And we also had limited background data for the grey use of the estate. So we didn't really know what kind of population we were working with, how they were using the woodlands, how they were using the estate and things. So a bit of background is the bigger picture of the area. So you can just about see the blue outline on the map. That's the Knowsley estate. You've got the walled estate, which is the smaller dotted line, the solid line, and then the dotted line is the bigger land that's in hand as well from the estate. And you can see really clearly from the map the red stronghold that's northernmost side West Lancashire goes all the way up the Sefton coastline. The brighter red, the marking on the map, the more recent the red squirrel sighting. And we can see that historical records suggest that there was movement between the estate and the stronghold. So we can see some brighter red records down at the end of the estate, brighter red records in the stronghold, and then some historical movement in between. And what's quite important to note is that this map only shows the most recent records. So there's probably duplication on top of lots of things. And also in the earlier period of this map, red squirrels would have been very common. So they probably weren't, records probably weren't submitted very often. So this is records submitted to the local Environment Record Centre at the Biobank. So we can assume that historical data was certainly underreporting, whereas the more recent data is more accurate. And what's really clear is that there's a delineation. You can see the line sort of across the north end of the estate. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor on the slide, where you get a sort of a barrier. The red sightings become less and less after that line. And that delineation is where the efforts of the Red Alert Volunteer Group and Lancashire Wildlife Trust sort of ends. That's the end of their jurisdiction. So you can see how effective their work is being in protecting the red squirrels, protecting the stronghold, and keeping them in that area. But what you can see is the effect of not having very good control, very consistent control in our area. We have much fewer sightings. And at the moment, based on our work, we think that the reds are locally extinct. We don't have any records of them on site at the moment. So what we want to ask ourselves is, can we create an environment where the reds can regularly move through this area again, and we can get reds back to the Knowsley area, not just the estate, but this whole section where we've got this lower density of red sightings here. And so what we envisage is creating a low density grey squirrel corridor. It's unrealistic to expect that we wouldn't have any greys in the area based on the type of area that we're in, but a corridor where we can get reds moving through the landscape once again. So to do this, we had some identified needs. So we needed a better understanding of the squirrel population on the estate. We needed year-round coordinated grey squirrel control. And we needed to increase our connectivity, not just with the other projects and the strongholds in the local area, but also with the people and the communities in the local area. So something that's done really, really well up at the stronghold is community trap loan schemes, community engagement. That's something that currently we're not doing at the moment, we weren't doing. So we identified that as a need for our project. So better understanding of the squirrel population on the estate. This was reasonably easy for us to start doing. So we got a master's student to start a very extensive camera trapping effort and to also study the control records from a period of time, so January to June 2019. So from this is where we really kind of solidified our thoughts that there were no red squirrels present anymore on the estate. And we also started to understand where we were pulling our greys from primarily on the estate, which kind of woodland they used. So predictably, more commonly found in the broadleaf woodland than they were in the pine woodland, but also quite a lot from the mix. And make sure that our sex ratios, I'm really sorry, my dog's a little bit jumpy. I'll just take a second. I really do apologise. You should be okay now. Yeah, we got to know a little bit more about the sex ratios and our age demographics as well. We also wanted to tie in this understanding of the squirrel population on the estate with the year-round control, the coordinated control. Was what we were doing already effective? Could we be more effective if we had some more data? So again, the master's student, she looked at how our control worked in the different woodlands. So if we look at the first graph, graph A, this is our control woodland. So we had no grey squirrel control in this woodland at all. So you see the frequency of squirrel sightings on a camera. It's very fluctuating, goes up and down, no control in this woodland, so the grey squirrels have free reign. So this is what our population is doing by itself. And if we see in graph B, this is days since a control programme. So live trapping has been undertaken in the woodland, and the camera and a feeder went back up in the woodland the day the traps were pulled out. And it took, I think it was 53 days for the greys to move back into that woodland. So the more understanding we have of this kind of data from every single woodland on the estate, the more effective our control methods can be, because we can rotate our efforts according to what the woodland requires. This study was also really useful in evidencing why it's important to do this kind of checkup. So when we look at the next graph, we see a woodland that we thought we'd cleared, but actually by putting the camera and the feeder back up, we see that the greys are back in 3 days later. So in reality, the greys have probably never left that woodland. So it was useful for us as well to understand what sort of incorrect assumptions we might be making about having cleared a woodland. So this is data that we're continuing to collect now for lots of different woodlands around the estate, so that we know we can be as effective as possible in our work. So then finally, the increased connectivity with the people and the other projects and the red squirrel strongholds in the local area. So together, this is a big need. The three needs are really challenging things to do, and although we touch the surface with our sort of initial work with our master's student, there's a lot more to be done, particularly on the connectivity with people and projects. So this is where Reclaiming Reds came in. These three needs are what we're hoping to meet, or start to meet, with Reclaiming Reds. So this is an overview of our programme. So it's control and it's community, and volunteers are really at the centre of it. And again, it's based on what Heinz said, without volunteers, we would not be able to do the work that we're doing. So we have our community ranger who communicates the project through the local area, and it's really a two-strand engagement programme. So strand one is very basic. It's education, it's workshop, it's talks, it's events. So it's just getting people to understand why red squirrels are important, getting excited about red squirrels, excited about native species. And then the second strand of the community programme is that more actually on the ground action. So that's reaching those people that want to volunteer, that want to get involved in lots of different ways, not just squirrel control. So we have research and administration volunteer roles, and we have community volunteer roles as well. And then we have our control ranger, and she focuses the work on the control of the Knowsley estate, and also training volunteers for control throughout the local area, and also to support our community trap loan scheme, which is really central to getting the control work, not just on the estate, but back up through the map to meet the work of the Red Alert volunteers as well. So Reclaiming Reds is a 2-year project at the moment, and that's funded by a £100,000 National Lottery Heritage Fund grant. The project began in September 2020. It was meant to start in March 2020, but I don't need to tell anybody why we weren't able to do that. Publicly, we launched in January 2020. We obviously had a lot of work to do once we'd recruited the staff before we were able to be public facing. So if we just have a quick look at this map again, and remember the focus is really to work in that area from the estate up the map to where we have that that delineation of the work. So we're going to meet the work of the amazing work that's already going on through Lancashire Wildlife Trust and the Red Alert volunteers, and hopefully bring in a much larger area that's suitable for red squirrels. So to date, volunteers, we have fully trained and inducted 8 control volunteers, 4 community volunteers, and 6 research and administration volunteers. And we have 36 inquiries pending further induction and training. So although we launched publicly on the 4th of January, that was also the day we went back into the 3rd lockdown. So it's been a challenging time to try and launch a community programme and a volunteering programme. So we've been a little bit slower off the ground than we'd have hoped for. But the work we've got from our volunteers already is fantastic. And as we open up more and more elements of the project, there's going to be more and more opportunities for people to get involved. For education, our workshop programme launched in April, once restrictions eased a little bit. Although we do have an online offering now as well for workshops, just for people that maybe aren't comfortable with in-person sessions. These are free educational workshops, and they're available right through from early years foundations right through to degree level, and for community groups as well. It's not just for schools, it's for any group that might be interested in having a talk. The talks are tailored based on the needs and the interests of the groups. And our preliminary evaluation data is very promising. So at the minute, we've been into primary schools, and 97% of Key Stage 1 pupils were able to identify forest as red squirrel habitat after a session with Reclaiming Reds, which I think is very easy to think, well, of course they were, of course squirrels come from forests. But in an urban area where grey squirrels are seen in gardens, it's quite interesting learning. And as our evaluation goes on, what we'll be doing is trying to gather baseline data to see what people's understanding was before we go into whichever workshop we're going into, and then show what they're able to discuss after the workshop to really show that's change as well, and not just existing baseline knowledge. Publicity, there's no point beating around the bush. We had a very challenging start with some negative public attention in January. I think, you know, it's a sort of attention that moves from project to project, and it was our turn in January. And what we're very, very conscious of understanding that some people's concerns are entirely legitimate, and that we've really redeveloped our social media approach now to not only give out the information that we want to do, but sort of alleviate people's concerns, and also really try and face some of that false news and false science that does circulate, to try and really be transparent with people about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why the science backs up exactly what we're doing. our community trap loan scheme, we've got 15 households so far registered interest, but that's through no advertising, that's just organic through generic project advertising. But in the next few weeks, we've got further private talks that target sort of logistically important project areas, groups in those areas, to try and start to push that, and we'll be soft launching the scheme in June. So we have the volunteers ready, the traps are ready, so here's some of the volunteers sort of setting the traps up, getting them wrapped and tagged and labelled and things. So that's a programme that we're hoping to start very, very soon. And then controls, so we have live capture traps being rotated through the woodlands on the Knowsley estate. So we're using the information that we got from our master's student and from the knowledge that we have from the guys that have worked on the estate on the ground for a long time to be a lot more strategic in our approach. And we're continuing that camera trap monitoring before we enter a woodland and after the woodland is cleared to get more recolonisation rates information so that we can be more and more effective in our trapping and be more and more efficient and make better use of our time. And then we're also working on permissions for volunteers to trap in the wider project area to complement the work that's already been done in the area and to complement the community trap loan scheme as well. So looking to the future, our funding runs out in September 2022, and we're of course going to be exploring further funding options. You know, a 2-year project is really the tip of the iceberg. It could almost be viewed as a pilot to see then how we're going to expand our efforts to allow red squirrels to once again thrive in the area. You know, 2 years would be a completely unrealistic time frame to do anything about that. And I think it's, you know, that's a very challenging thing to be able to communicate to people sometimes. I think people get, you know, very exciting. Well, when are you bringing red squirrels back and how are you bringing them back? And it's, well, we think we know how we're going to do it, but it's, you know, it's a long-term goal. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. Hopefully our communication is making that clear, and that hopefully in the future we've got a lot more exciting work to be doing as well. We'll be able to expand into lots of different areas after this initial 2-year period. So thank you very much for your time. Happy to take questions at the end, and our contact details are there, but you can get our Reclaiming Red's email address is on our website as well. So thank you very much.
It's brilliant. Thank you very much, Bridget. Great new project. Right, so I'll jump straight into the questions. Let's have a look. Are there any printed materials to give landowners? Do you have any printed materials?
We do.
We're actually trying to get away from printed materials and communicating via the internet, you know, social media, and newsletters by email. But yes, we do a 6-monthly newsletter that goes out to our Friends of Red Squirrel membership scheme.
Yeah, so we're using printed materials at the moment based on feedback that some of our sort of project area isn't that digitally sort of savvy, and they're not really using the online world. So although predominantly we're using online platforms, particularly for communication with volunteers and newsletters and things, we also having flyers just to give that baseline information about what we're doing.
Yeah, we've got some postcards that we did for the fertility control project, but obviously with not having been to any events really this year, there's been nowhere to take them to as such. But yeah, if people are interested, then yeah, just get into touch with one or other of us. And afforestation is promoted as climate change mitigation, but what considerations are necessary where greys and reds coexist?
Well, you don't really want them to coexist.
They don't really coexist.
But yeah, I think we covered some of those points in
Yeah.
terms of the effects it has on forests and things that need to be considered. You know, grey squirrel management is a necessity in order to protect our forests, in order to protect our biodiversity and long-term stability of our forests.
Lost my chat function. Yes, and I mean, if you're looking at afforestation, you know, you might, what you might do, you know, you're creating habitat for red squirrels, but you're also at the same time potentially creating habitat for grey squirrels. So you may allow red squirrels to move through the landscape, but you may also allow grey squirrels to move into new areas. So I think as Heinz and others have talked about, what's really important is grey squirrel management in those areas where grey squirrels are. In areas where red squirrel numbers are low, is it still effective to control grey squirrel numbers? I think where red squirrel numbers are low, or not, or in grey only areas, sometimes the greys are managed for tree damage rather than for red squirrel conservation, especially in grey only areas. And it is really important to manage them in those areas to keep the population numbers down, because the higher the population, the more damage that they cause. Heinz, where red squirrel numbers are low, is it still effective to manage grey squirrels? I think yes, but
yeah, I think one of the graphs I shared, the one of South Scotland, was just one example out of many estates in that same catchment that demonstrated. That particular estate was very skeptical initially, and the forest manager of the estate said, well, no, he actually said the ship had sailed for red squirrels. There's the exact words. But after convincing him to control grey squirrels over time, over 3-4 years, he was prepared to eat his hat, and it does make a difference. There's another estate, Wallington in Northumberland, for example. Greys had overrun the estate, massive estate managed by the National Trust. They started controlling, and reds came back, and it's a visitor attraction, but it's an ongoing battle. It is worth it.
Yeah, and obviously Knowsley hoping that recent red squirrel sightings, although not at the moment, will turn into lots of red squirrels in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. For us, the value is clear in that they were able to move in that area before. So I think we just need to get the grey squirrel numbers back to the point that they were when that was possible, and then hopefully better again and get more and more.
Another interesting fact to add to the conversation in terms of managing greys and timber damage. I had an interesting conversation with a woodland manager, one of the bigger woodland agencies in Cumbria, in the north of England, and I was surprised him saying that he's not really had any problems with grey squirrel tree damage so much in Cumbria. And I thought to myself, well, maybe that's because of all the effort the local volunteer groups are putting into managing those greys, keeping their numbers low. But anyway, nevertheless, it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, if you do reduce the number of grey squirrels, you do reduce the levels of damage. It is when they're high, it's particularly noticeable. It's particularly bad. But thankfully, yes, in Northern England, you do have lots of fantastic volunteers working, don't you? Is there a way of easily telling grey squirrel damage from other damage? Yeah, so the grey squirrel damage on trees, you can often see the teeth marks, and they strip bits of bark. Whereas if it's larger things like deer, it can be a noticeable difference between the rubbing. But it is something that we're hoping through the Knowledge Exchange Woodland Management Subcommittee that we might put together a guide that shows the difference between different types of animals and the different types of damage that you're looking for, and you can see.
There was one question asking about how do you tell the difference between if it's a rabbit or whether it's a grey squirrel. Rabbits do damage trees up to the height of about 0.5 meter. But yeah, I suppose it needs a bit of expertise to tell whether the teeth marks are rabbit or squirrel.
Yeah, definitely. Let's look. Those who argue against grey control suggest the decline of the red is due to the loss of habitat, but woodland cover has tripled since the 1920s at the same time as reds have been lost over most of the country. And how is this explained? Oh, it's only really explained through the grey squirrel expansion. We could have more red squirrels in the country because of the the increases in woodland cover that we have, but we don't because of the grey squirrel.
It reminds me of Galloway Forest in Dumfries and Galloway, where there was no conifer forest there decades ago, and there were very few red squirrels. But with the establishment of Galloway Forest, and as it matured, reds started to become more numerous. It provided a habitat for them. So alongside the afforestation, increase of the tree cover, red squirrels also rebounded. It's just that there's still that interaction and battle with grey squirrels when they come into an area.
Yeah. Yeah. And do red squirrels strip bark as well? I've heard of a little bit of evidence of them because I think they take a little bit of it, don't they, for their nesting materials sometimes, but I don't think they do it on the they don't do it on the same level. They're not ripping the bark off huge areas of the tree. And I know Craig Shuttleworth said in Gwynedd there's evidence of, as they've reduced the grey squirrel population in Gwynedd and as the red squirrels have come back, then the tree damage has been significantly reduced because the grey squirrels are no longer there. And I know also there's another estate, the Lowther estate, where they manage it for woodland and for timber and for commercial forestry, but they also manage it for red squirrels as well to keep the grey squirrels out. And they find that, you know, trees and the red squirrels coexist together perfectly well.
Grey squirrels also tend to live at a much higher density. They just breed so fast and there's so many of them that the impact is much more significant. Yeah.
A high-profile TV person has adopted a grey squirrel and is parading it on Twitter as a pet. Is this legal? As far as I understand, and there is a there is a license application that Natural England have for keeping non-Indigenous mammals, for things like grey squirrels and mink and koipu and muskrat. So I think for anything like that, you have to actually apply for a license to keep it, is my understanding. Yeah. The squirrel in the first video looked like it was licking the tissue it had exposed. I had the impression that it was either a result of territoriality or the, are they looking for the sap as a nutritious? Yes, so during the main bark stripping season is between April and August, and that's when the sap and phloem is really flowing in the tree. And so yes, they do look like, from the videos that we've captured and from other evidence, that they are looking for the sap underneath the bark. How much would the volunteers' amazing work cost if it was actually salaried?
So part of our lottery, part of our lottery application, we had to quantify what we thought volunteers would bring to the project in terms of a salary, and I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but I mean a lot.
Yeah,
it's about £60 per grey squirrel to remove it. And
is that for yourself and the rangers, or is it just
that's the cost? That's what it would cost. And if you extrapolate that to the number of grey squirrels controlled in 2020 in the north of England, I won't mention the figure, but it's tens of thousands. Won't mention the figure because of, you know, you don't want anti-activists to get hold of that figure and use it. But yeah, no, it's tens of thousands of greys that are removed from the north of England last year. Multiply that by 60 and it's a lot.
Yeah, and that's to do with the greys, and that's to do with actual management. I mean, if you put on top of that the surveying that they do and the monitoring and all the other stuff, it would be much higher, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's not counting that.
Yeah. What is the likely impact on reds and greys as plantation forestry transitions from majority mature to larger proportion immature as we pass peak timber and the reduction in food supply? So reflecting on the age demographic of commercial plantations, and aware this is an acute challenge in some locations, but a more general picture would be useful. So in Northern England, you're finding as the conifer plantations come to maturity and they're being felled, is there an impact on the reds?
It's very difficult to say yes or no. I mean, there's extensive areas of woodland in north of England, you know, Kielder Forest, for example, you know, 650 square kilometers of forest. Obviously, there's a restocking of forest as they fell, but a proportion of that will be broadleaf trees. And there is half and half still a policy of not planting so many oaks, for example. And that goes back to my comment in my slide. Is that a good idea for us to veer away from planting our native species like oak and like hazel? So there are dynamics going on behind the scenes we don't fully understand, but nevertheless, there's still enough habitat out there a lot of habitat. But the government's intention is to expand our forests in the next decade or two. So there are going to be more afforestation projects out there as well to facilitate more habitat to come into existence. I'm not sure if that answers the question, or that was the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I guess, and as people move also into continuous cover forestry management, so, you know, away from so much clear felling in some areas and towards CCF, so that you're continuously managing a habitat for all of the species that are there, not just the trees.
You could also argue there's plenty of habitat out there. It's just that grey squirrels occupy it at the moment.
Well, that's true. And I mean, red squirrels could be found in parks and gardens as well, if they were able to. And as we've seen in Aberdeen, as they've controlled and removed the grey squirrels from Aberdeen, so the red squirrels have come in, because I think there's a misconception that some people think that red squirrels can't live in urban areas, but they can, and they do if they're able to, and if they're not outcompeted by the greys. Once again, the 1995 estimate of 2.5 to 3 million UK grey population figure appears. What's the 2021 estimate? I think 3 million is the Mammal Society. Is it 3 million is the Mammal Society estimate of grey squirrels? But I think it's less well known, because unlike red squirrels that are monitored in certain areas of, of the country, the grey squirrels aren't monitored as such and surveyed for numbers all over, are they?
It's just estimates. It's really difficult for us to say there's X number. So these are estimates that's being referred to.
Yeah. And somebody says, should we refer to invasive species rather than invasive non-native species, as we live in a multicultural society? I think the term invasive non-native species is just a scientific term to say that so that people understand that they were introduced. It's not a term where we were really trying to vilify a species in any way. It's just the concern that species is creating an impact. But I think I know the shorter term is people just often call them invasive species. Is there any, Bridget, is there any thoughts about including shooting in the Reclaiming the Reds project, or are you going to focus on trapping?
So the focus is on trapping because it's a lot more accessible, so we can get a lot more volunteers involved. That being said, we're very conscious there's a lot of very competent shooters in the area as well that would really like to be involved. So it's not something we're completely ruling out, because I don't know if it's the same comment or somewhere else. Obviously, there's seasons where trapping is much less efficient as well, and we're very conscious of that. So yeah, it's a bit of a developing thing. It's I'm sure everybody can understand shooting's a lot more complex. It's from that public perception point of view. Somebody walking around a woodland with a gun is a lot more challenging for people to get on board with, particularly in an urban area. Not due to lack of effort on the discretion of volunteers and things. It's just one of those things that it's a bit more challenging for us. But yeah, we absolutely acknowledge the value of shooting, and we don't rule it out in the future. It's just a developing thing.
Thank you, Bridget. Heinz, you mentioned the impact on dormice in terms of competition for food. Do they actively predate dormice directly?
There's no evidence to suggest so, but neither is there the opposite. So it's likely, the paper said, but the impact that can be demonstrated is the competition for food in that case.
Yeah, that's great. So what is there was one question that we got sent in the impact of pine martens. How significant are pine martens in England or Scotland in terms of grey squirrels, their impact on grey squirrels?
I think it's important to understand that before pine martens to have the necessary impact on grey squirrels, you need the pine martens to be at a particular density per hectare or per square kilometre. Pine martens breed very slowly, and it's going to be decades before they naturally recolonize the countryside. But it's that critical level of pine marten density per area that you need to have the necessary impact. So we're still a long way off before we'll start seeing that benefit here. In Ireland, that was just a natural process over time, and the conditions were just right. Even in Scotland, pine martens are still low numbers in the south of Scotland. Nevertheless, they are breeding and spreading. What pine martens need to thrive is old forest, because it provides that hollows in the trees where they nest, and therefore that's why you find charities and conservation organizations like the Vincent Wildlife Trust that help pine martens through facilitating building nest boxes to facilitate habitat or nest spaces for them so that they can breed and thrive. But yeah, really important. It's going to take decades because they're such slow breeders. It will take time.
And there was a paper that came out from Queen's University Belfast that just highlighted the issue that pine martens won't move into urban environments. So where you've got big urban environments, they will have no impact on grey squirrels in those areas because they won't live in them. So you will still, if you just relied on pine martens, you would still have these big urban areas acting as a reservoir for grey squirrels, which may then evolve and adapt to coexist with pine marten and to understand that the pine marten is a threat and therefore move back out. So the pine marten is part of the solution, but it's not the only solution, and we still have to, work with volunteers and landowners to continue managing grey squirrels, actively managing grey squirrels, and maybe look to the fertility control as well in the future. What help, if any, has there been received from the announcements in the England Trees Action Plan? The England Trees Action Plan did mention the issue of grey squirrels and the need to manage them, their impacts on trees. It mentioned an update and a refresh of the grey squirrel policy and action plan and support for our fertility control research and looking at predators such as pine martens. It also discussed working with the UK Squirrel Accord in terms of red squirrel conservation and ensuring their expansion in England, red squirrel expansion in England, and to work with us on the creation of a best practice guide for woodland management practice to reduce impacts on red squirrels. So yes, the England Trees Action Plan was a useful vehicle. I think we've pretty much answered most of the questions, unless you saw any more, Heinz.
There was one comment from Graham that just pointed out that Forestry England have formulated their management plans. One particular example Graham mentioned was Kidland Forest, where they've planned the future restocking as trees are felled. They've planned ahead just to the new trees going in. Over the long term, the composition of that forest will facilitate a good, as best it can, food supply for red squirrels over time. Different tree species produce seeds at different intervals and timings of the year and so on. So that's been taken into consideration. A bit of science gone into, when does Scots pine fruit, how regular does it fruit, spruce and various tree species. So that's a good example of good forest planning, management planning.
That's great. And there was another one. With live trapping, have you found there to be any difference in effectiveness between multi-catch or single catch traps?
We tend to use single catch traps, and there have been instances where two greys have entered it. But no, we tend to just place multiple traps in close proximity if there's a need, if there are high numbers, instead of using a trap that takes multiple animals. It's more easy to deal with a trap when there's only one animal in it. I wouldn't like to deal with multiple trap.
I'd say myself. It's very hard to be discreet with the multi-capture traps as well, depending on the area you're working in, because they're really big. So it's harder to manage, easier to steal, and they're very expensive. So then you're losing equipment as well, which obviously you don't want to do.
I guess you wouldn't want to try and capture a red squirrel and a grey squirrel in an individual trap either, and have them in close proximity in case of disease transmission. And
just to add, there are proper protocols to follow when you are live trapping, the way you prepare the trap, the way you cover it to provide shelter, disinfecting the trap, and etc. There will be training available in the near future, but there already is informal training available to help volunteers get up to speed.
Brilliant. And if anybody wants to find out more about getting involved in Red Squirrels Northern England or any of the groups or Knowsley, I'm sure they can contact you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Heinz and Bridget, for sharing your knowledge and joining us today. And thank you for everyone else that's come online, wherever you are. I will make a recording of this webinar available on the Squirrel Accord YouTube channel shortly. Do keep an eye on our events page of our website for future webinars and events, and have a look on all 3 of our websites to want to find out more about our work. Get involved with the rest of Invasive Species Week. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you both. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.